Um, Janet, you asked, let's touch on the topic of rest breaks during workouts and between sets. So your rest between your sets. The importance of these rest periods and like why they're important. So the rest periods between sets are extremely important because one thing we have to just really keep in mind and remember is that the purpose of these workouts that are programmed and doing strength training and lifting weights, it's not to just burn the most amount of calories. The purpose of these workouts are to stimulate the muscle as much as possible. That way, your body gets signals basically telling your body to, okay, I need to build muscle because my muscle is being challenged in this way. And when your muscle gets that stimulation, it basically tells it, hey, like I need this muscle. I need to either grow muscle or keep the muscle I have in order to survive because my environment is putting me in a spot where I need to utilize them. So it's basically that like use it or lose it scenario of we want to use those muscles maximally to keep that muscle around. Or if you have like a low amount of muscle mass and you're trying to build more, which most people like need to get the body they want to actually build muscle. They want to grow muscle. So the purpose of the workouts are to keep muscle around and to build muscle. And that is all going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to like visually give you more of a shape look of what most people want. Most people don't just want to like get smaller. Most people want to actually like, have like shaped quads or shaped thighs or shaped glutes or shaped arms. Most people also want to see more muscle tone in their quads, glutes, arms, areas like that where if you don't have any muscle underneath and you just like lose weight and get smaller, you might fit into smaller clothes, but you aren't going to have like defined triceps or biceps or quads or hamstrings. So you're not going to have that muscle definition, muscle tone that majority of people in here likely want. So those are the two like I would say you could call it like vanity reasons why we want to be lifting weights is because that's what gives you that muscle shape and muscle tone that you're probably looking for. Um, Other reasons why we want to maximize the amount of muscle that we can build is because it really helps with a lot of health complications or health things, or helps to avoid health issues down the road. So having more muscle and stimulating the muscle lifting weights does help with blood sugar control. So there's different ways where basically when you eat carbs, your body breaks down the carbohydrates that you eat, and then that's how your blood sugar rises, is that breaking down of those carbs, those sugars that are in the carbs gets into your bloodstream. And then once it's in your bloodstream, it gets filtered out into or transported into different tissues in the body that need its use. So it can get transported to different cells that like help, your brain think. Carbs are a big fuel source for our brain. The sugars in our bloodstream get filtered to sometimes our liver and our kidneys, and that's where some of that is stored, especially in the liver. Gets transported to our muscle, where that carbohydrate is stored in the muscle too. And a big transporter, or not a transporter, but a big kind of, you could call it a transporter almost, is insulin, which you've probably heard of. Insulin helps to get that blood sugar out of the bloodstream and helps to get it to those tissues that need it, which helps to bring your blood sugar back down to baseline, which is good. Like we don't want an elevated blood sugar response for a long period of time because that can cause a lot of issues, diabetes, kidney issues, even. Now you're gonna always have some kind of rise in your blood sugar when you eat carbs, which is a normal response. We just don't want it to linger too long. So being able to get that blood sugar out of the bloodstream when it's not supposed to be there and get it to the places in the body that need it is really helpful. And one thing that lifting weights does is it, and exercising in general, it helps to increase the effectiveness of this other transporter called a GLUT4 transporter. So it's basically this transporter in the body that also helps to get blood sugar out of the bloodstream to the places that it wants. So the more you work out, especially the more you lift weights, that GLUT4 transporter is going to be more effective with kind of stabilizing blood sugar. So overall gist of this is lifting weights helps to maintain stable blood sugar better. Also, lifting weights helps to increase bone mineral density. Whenever you are placing some kind of like stress as far as like weight on your bones, especially through a range of motion as you're doing an exercise. That like those forces of compressing that bone actually help to increase bone mineral density too, which is why lifting weights is so important. So we want to think we're lifting weights not necessarily to burn calories during the exercise, but we're lifting weights to have the muscle around so we can look more toned, so we can have the shape that we want. And also, so we can have all those health benefits that come along with lifting. And another thing lifting does is it obviously increases your muscle mass, which does burn a little bit more calories at rest than, let's say, body fat. Um, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but body fat burns somewhere, let's say, around like 10 calories per pound of body fat you have on your frame. That's how much it burns. So for every pound of body fat you have, it's going to burn about 10 calories per day. But muscle mass might be around like 40 calories per day for every pound that you have. So it's a little bit more. Does it make like a crazy big difference as far as just your resting metabolism and how much you burn? No, a lot of people, a lot of coaches even like talk about it being this huge difference. It doesn't make a huge difference, but it does make a little bit of difference. And every little bit counts. But one thing that lifting does is it does make it easier to progress. So like it's much easier to make a lift harder than it is to make, let's say, cardio harder. And by making the lift harder, by like increasing the amount of weight you're doing over time, you can burn more calories over time doing that lift. Like you're going to burn more calories if you build up to being able to squat 200 pounds for a set of 10 versus squatting 50 pounds for a set of 10 because your body is doing more work and you're able to challenge that muscle. Now, when it comes to cardio, like in order to make that cardio harder, you have to either one, go faster, two, go for a longer distance, or maybe wear some kind of like weighted vest to just to make your body weight heavier so that cardio becomes harder to burn more calories. So practically lifting weights can make it a little bit easier to burn more calories per session because you're able to add difficulty to it, but that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of the lifting is to stimulate as much muscle growth or muscle maintenance as possible for all those health benefits, and for the visual benefits of it, because that's what most people like want their bodies to look like. Um, so I know I'm throwing a lot of info out here to get to the point of this question, but because the purpose of lifting weights is not to burn calories, we want to maximize the performance of each set. Because if we can maximize the performance of each set, we are going to be able to lift the most amount of weight for the most amount of reps, which is going to build the most amount of muscle. So if you are taking like very short rest periods between sets, let's say, you're doing sets of squats and you're doing 3 sets of 10, if you're resting just 30 seconds between each set, you might be able to really challenge the muscle in that first set. But by the time you go to that second set, it's only been 30 seconds of rest. You still have, that burning sensation you feel in your muscles. That's still kind of lingering. All that lactic acid in your muscles, all those metabolites, which kind of cause that burning sensation, are still in your muscles. And your muscles not fully recovered to be able to like really push it on that set number two because it's been such a short period of time. So by taking a really short rest period, you're not able to actually get the most out of set number two. And think about like if we are going to calculate how much weight we're doing for how many reps. If you're taking a 30-second rest, you might do 100 pounds for a set of 10 on the first set, let's say. But then you move to set number two, and because your rest period is so short, you might do that same 100 pounds and only be able to get like maybe 4 reps. So that drastically reduces the amount of total workload you're doing. And think about workload in terms of weight times reps. So that is significantly decreasing. But if you rest, let's say, a minute and a half or 2 minutes before you do your next set of squats, then you might be able to do 100 pounds for 8 reps instead. So that is doubling the amount of weight or the amount of reps you're doing in that set number two just from resting an extra minute or a minute and a half or even an extra 2 minutes. And if you rest, let's say, 5 minutes between sets of squats, you might even be able to hit 10 reps on your second set, just like you did on your first. And that's an extra couple of reps that you're able to hit in that exercise, which is overall more workload to the muscle, which is more muscle stimulation, which is going to cause more muscle growth over time. Now, obviously, there's a limit to this of um, how much benefit you get from resting more. And then there's also practicality around this. So, like if you were to rest 5 minutes between sets of squats, you might be able to get 10 reps on set number two. And if you rest 10 minutes between sets of squats, you might still only be able to get 10 reps on set number two. Like you might not get a benefit if you just continue to increase that rest time. And also, too, practically speaking, if you're resting 10 minutes between every single set and you're doing the amount of sets you need to do to see progress, then your workouts are going to be extremely long and you're not going to be able to do the amount of sets that you need to see progress in a reasonable amount of time. You're going to be in the gym for like 4 hours or something. So practically, it doesn't make sense to like, you know, drag out those rest periods longer than the amount of benefit you get from it, but also longer than what's actual like practical for your schedule. So like there's been research regarding rest periods and rest times, and most people, average person, resting about 2 minutes between sets is pretty sufficient to be able to get the most out of that next set. Now it obviously varies person to person depending on strength level too. If somebody is very strong, they might have to rest a little bit longer before they go into their next set. So, like somebody who's squatting with 50 pounds might feel good to go after a minute and a half to 2 minutes. Somebody who is squatting 400 pounds for a set of 10, they might have to rest 5 to 6 minutes or maybe even longer before their muscles feel fully recovered and ready to go. So the amount of load or how heavy you're able to go and your current strength level does play a role in how long your rest period should be. With which, like the stronger you are, probably the longer rest periods you need to take. But I always recommend at minimum, if you're just going from one exercise, one set to the same exercise in your set two, a minute and a half is like the minimum amount usually that I typically recommend, especially for like or exercises that work multiple muscle groups like a squat or a deadlift or a bench press. Um, Now, there's another component when it comes to rest times, why they're important is because we want the muscle to be the limiting factor too. So when we like fail a set or get close to failure and then we stop, like let's say if you are doing sets of squats and you're aiming towards like to the point where you think you maybe have one rep left in the tank, um, you want that muscle to be the limiting factor because you're trying to get close to failure with that muscle, and that's what's going to cause that muscle to grow, change its shape, which is going to cause the appearance of more muscle tone and all that. Um, we don't want our heart rate or our cardiovascular system to be the limiting factor. And if you're taking such short rest periods, let's say 30 seconds, you might be very winded like by the time you're supposed to go and do your second set. Like if I were to do a set of 10 on squats and really push myself the way I should and then just rest 30 seconds, like I'm probably going to be huffing and puffing a little bit going into that second set of squats, which means I'm probably going to feel just like cardiovascular wise, like tired, out of breath, and that's going to make me stop my set number two before I actually reach muscular failure. So we want the limiting factor in any exercise we do to be the muscle that we're targeting. We don't want it to be our heart rate's getting too high to where we're out of breath, and that's causing us to stop. So that is another reason why taking adequate rest period is really important between sets because we want the limiting factor to be that muscle. We want to think, okay, I'm relaxing. I've done my warm up and all that kind of stuff. I'm relaxing, getting ready to do my set. I'm extremely focused for this first set of squats. I'm pushing myself, making it really difficult. Finish my set of squats. I'm tired. I'm out of breath. My legs feel like jello. I'm going to sit there and just rest for 2 minutes. Let my, heart rate come back down. Let my breathing get back to normal. And then I'm going to get ready mentally and physically before I do my set number two to really push that threshold. That's how you want to approach it. You don't want to think, okay, I'm doing a set and I'm just like busting out my sets, busting out my reps. I'm feeling a little bit of a burn, heart rate's getting up, and then I stop. And then I'm resting 30 seconds, then I'm doing another exercise or another set, quick, feeling a burn, feeling my heart rate come up, and then I stop. Like Sure, you're using weights if you're doing that, but you're not getting the most out of like the changes you could really see in your body composition, and the changes you can really see in the amount of lean muscle you build when you're doing it that way. In the beginning, when you're a beginner and your body responds really easy to lifting weights, you'll probably see some progress from it, but eventually you'll stall out, and that's where people end up like lifting, doing these types of workouts for 6 months, a year, and not really seeing their body change much. And that's because they're rushing their rest periods. They're not getting close enough to failure. They're not letting their heart rate come down. So they're able to actually, cardio wise, like push that set as much as they should. And they're not getting as much out of it. They're kind of just going through the motions, running through the workout like in a circuit style, and just feeling their heart rate up, feeling tired, but not like fully stimulating, the muscle as much. Um, so that's kind of the importance of rest periods. One thing you can do, which I did talk about this in the video that I made going over like the template workout programs I gave to you guys, and how to use those, is I recommend, like I said, a minute and a half rest period minimum between doing the same exercise again, which I would recommend probably 2 minutes minimum, a little bit more for like compound exercises. So exercises that work multiple muscles like the squat, deadlift, and bench press. I recommend closer to like 2 minutes of rest between those actually, but let's say a minute and a half is kind of a minimum amount of rest period you want between doing the same exercise again or hitting the same muscle group again. What you can do is you can take a 45-second rest period as long as your heart rate isn't like becoming a limiting factor, right? Because we don't want that to be a limiting factor. But as long as your heart rate is not becoming a limiting factor, or cardio wise, like that's not becoming a limiting factor, you can alternate different muscle group exercises back to back with like a 45-second rest in between the two. So let's say if you're doing an upper body day and you have like bench press, and then your next exercise is lat pull downs. Bench press is working your chest, shoulders, and triceps. Your lat pull down is working your back and your biceps. So there's really not any like muscle group overlap between those two exercises. That's what's called antagonist exercises. But in general, there's no overlap really. It's not like you were to do a lat pull down and then do a seated row. Seated row is going to work your back and biceps. Lat pull down is working your back and biceps. So those are overlapping, right? But a bench press and a lat pull down, there's not really, many overlapping muscle groups with those. So you could do like a set of bench if you're short on time, then rest just 45 seconds, do a set of lat pull downs, rest 45 seconds, then do a set of bench, rest 45 seconds, and so on until you finish the 3 sets or however many sets you have programmed for each of those. That is a way to kind of speed up your rest times. But when you do it that way, you're resting 45 seconds after your first set of bench. You're doing your set of lat pull downs, which will probably take you 30 to 45 seconds to do that set. Then you're resting another 45 seconds before you do your next set of bench press. So in total, like the time between you finish your first set of bench and you get to your second set of bench, that's probably over 2 minutes of actual time. So your muscle is actually having that adequate time to recover before you do set number two. Now, like I said, you want to make sure cardiovascular wise, heart rate wise, like that's not becoming a limiting factor. Like if you're huffing and puffing out of breath, like even though your muscle is recovered, your, cardiovascular wise is probably going to hold you back a little bit. But if, your cardio and your heart rate isn't holding you back, that's a good way to do it if you're short on time or if you find your workouts are lasting longer. With that said, if you have the time to do it, to rest just a full minute and a half to 2 minutes and just sit there between sets, that is better for muscle group than alternating back and forth because you're just going to be more fresh going into each set. But if you're short on time or you're crammed on time, that is a good way to go about it. I do that a lot, especially with my upper body days. My lower body days, I tend to do it less often just because when you're doing lower body exercises, there's just more overlap with muscle groups between the two. So it's harder to find exercises that you can really alternate well that don't affect each other. And also too, with lower body, you're probably using heavier weights with your lower body in general than you are with your upper body, which means you're just overall going to be a little bit more taxed after each set of lower body. So you probably need to just sit there for 1.5 to 2 minutes between before you go into your next set. But with upper body, you're probably using a little bit less weight. With upper body, you can like really easily do alternating exercises that don't overlap at all. Like I said, like a bench press with a lat pull down, and then your next exercise could be a dumbbell incline press with a seated row. Your next exercise could be like seated dumbbell raises and like tricep push downs. Like there's no overlap with those two. Your next set of two exercises you alternate could be like rear delt flies and bicep curls. So like all of those kind of combination of alternations don't want to overlap with each other. And that's a lot of times how I go about my upper body days. The lower body, like I said, I don't do it as much because my lower body sets just tax me a lot more. They probably do the same for you too. Also, there's more overlap between lower body exercises, so they're going to affect each other more. But let me know if that answered your questions as far as like the importance of the rest breaks, why they're important and everything, and also like how to go about those and think about them. Um, so next question, which I guess will be the last question, unless Misty or Janet throw in any like follow-up questions in the box. Um, but last question is Janet's question regarding workouts. So when do you increase the weight on exercises? And if you've had the same weight and reps for a week or a couple of sessions, is that too soon to increase them? So this is actually a question I've been getting a lot lately. So I might have to film a separate video on it eventually, but let me actually try to just answer this now. So I find a lot of people, I think, kind of overcomplicate this a little bit as far as how to go about increasing their weights and their reps with their exercises. So I should be sharing my screen here, so you should see this Word document. So what I recommend is, let's say if you have, let's say for squats, and you have 3 sets of, let's go with 10 to 13 reps programmed. Okay. So what you generally want to do is every set you want to follow a couple of rules. Or really like one, well, I guess let me say a couple of rules. One rule would be you want to use good form, which means full range of motion. You want to have around a 1 to 2 second lowering phase, or what's called the eccentric of each rep, followed by maybe like a very brief pause. Doesn't have to be a super long pause, but maybe a half a second pause in the stretch position of the rep, followed by trying to really like contract the muscle and lift the weight up as fast as possible, but with control. Like you don't want to use a lot of momentum or do it like a crazy person. So full range of motion, 1 to 2 seconds on the way down, aka the eccentric portion of the rep, aka you could even call this like the stretch phase of the rep. So this would be like when you're lowering the weight on a bicep curl. This would be like you're lowering the weight on a bench press, lowering the weight on a squat, lowering the weight on a deadlift. And then it would basically be the opposite if you're doing something on cables. Like if you're doing, well, maybe not necessarily the opposite, but for like um, a lot of cable exercises, when like the cables are up high and you're pushing down, right? The stretch portion of the rep would be when your hand is actually going up. The weight on the cable stack is still going down, but like your hand is going up. So like tricep push down, the stretch phase would be when you're bringing your arm up. You want to like slow that down 1 to 2 seconds probably. You want to get like a very brief pause at this like fully stretched position. Like if I'm doing cable push downs like this would be the fully stretched position. My tricep is stretched around my elbow joint here. So you want that to be like maybe a half a second stretch. Like I said, it doesn't have to be like super long, doesn't have to be a dramatic pause, but a little bit of a stretch. And then a fast as possible, but controlled contraction phase, which is really called the concentric phase, but contraction is, I think, is a term that most people will connect a little bit more. But you want to have a fast as possible but controlled contraction phase. So that's like the contraction phase, or concentric is when you're lifting the weight up in a bicep curl. You want to move that weight as fast as possible. It just will be very slow as you get towards the end of your set when you get close to failure, which kind of brings me to rule number two, is you want to um, be around 2 reps in reserve or 2 reps away from failure, um, really for every single set at least, or maybe even closer. Maybe some sets actually hitting failure, or maybe 1 rep shy from failure. Um, Anything more than 2 reps away from failure, or especially anything away like farther than 3 reps away from failure, you're not going to really be fully stimulating the muscle the way you need to actually like see changes in your shape and muscle mass. So these are like a couple of rules that we want to follow when we kind of go about like upping our weights or upping our reps. So we want to use good form, full range of motion, 1 to 2 seconds in the stretch portion with a very brief pause, fully stretched, and then contracting as fast as possible, but with control. And then at the end of each set, we want to be able to stop and think, I had at most 2 reps left in the tank. Or, even better if you have just 1 rep left in the tank. And then for some exercises, even better if you actually like hit failure. But that's kind of how we want to think about every single set. So when it comes to progressing with these reps per set, as long as you follow these 2 rules, the amount of reps you actually do is doesn't really matter that much. Like when we look at the research when it comes to building muscle and hypertrophy training, that's technically what it's called. Anything really in the 6 to 20, even sometimes um as high as the 6 to 30 rep range produces very similar amounts of muscle gain or changes in your muscle shape and everything, as long as you're following these 2 rules. As long as you're using good form, full range of motion, this kind of tempo, and as long as you're getting at least a couple reps shy from failure and actually getting that close to failure, not just like feeling a burn and thinking, oh, I only had 2 when you actually did have like 6 reps left in the tank, like actually getting 2 reps away from failure. As long as you follow those rules, really anything in the 6 to 30 rep range is going to produce very similar amounts of muscle growth. Um, Now, I think there are a lot of downsides of going higher than 30 reps. Anything higher than 20, your cardiovascular system starts to be a limiting factor. Like we talked about, we don't really want that to happen. Also, anything higher than 20, there's differences in the way the muscle fatigues when you're doing a set of like 10 versus a set of 25. And the way the muscle fatigues in a set of 25 is basically not to get too sciencey, but as you're progressing through a set of like, let's say 25 reps, you really feel this like intense burn. And sometimes that intense burn forces you to stop the set before you actually get to this 2 rep away from failure mark because the burn is just so intense. Like you could actually crank out 6 more reps, but it's just so painful that you actually stop. Whereas when you're doing a set of 10, because you're just doing less reps, that type of burn doesn't occur, and you actually like are able to reach failure without feeling that burn and that burn not being a limiting factor of you getting close to failure. So I think there's downsides of going above 20. So I really kind of recommend just staying like in the 6 to 20. Now, the reason why I program specific rep ranges or why anybody would that are more narrow than just 6 to 20 is because it guides your weight a little bit more. Like if I were to give you a rep range of just a 6 to 20, that's so wide, and you're like, I have no idea how many reps to do. But also when it comes to strength progression, which is has some slight differences to like muscle mass progression, there are benefits of having like a little bit narrower rep ranges and having certain focuses for a month at a time and then another month at a time. So that's why like rep ranges are typically written in like 10 to 13 versus just say, hey, do 6 to 20. Um, but but if we know this, that like 6 to 20 produces similar like muscle growth, as long as you're doing these 2 things, then I think it makes this whole concept around when to increase reps, when to increase weight, less intimidating. Because if you make a mistake and you pick a weight one day because you're like, I want to see if I can do this, and you are only able to hit 7 reps instead of 10 on your first set, like it's not a big deal because you're still in the 6 to 20 rep range that generally produces the same amount of muscle growth and the same changes there. Um, and then you just know that information of, okay, like, I fell a little bit short of my rep range. So I'm going to just, um, do a little bit lower weight on the next set. But what I recommend doing in general when it comes to progressing in reps is once you're doing probably half or more than half of your sets on the higher end of this rep range on average, then I would test out, how many reps you can do with a little bit higher of a weight. And I would just go up by the smallest increment in weight that you can, which is probably typically going to be 5 pounds, maybe 2.5, depending on the machine, if you're using a machine, but or depending on what kind of dumbbells you have available to you. But probably will be 5 pounds, typically most. So what it might look like is, let's say week one, for set one, you do 100 pounds times 13. And then your second set is maybe 100 pounds times 12. And then your third set is 100 pounds times 11. Now, you could do for week two, you could um, try to do 100 pounds and try to do 100 pounds for 3 sets of 13. Like you could do that and that could be your aim. And that is a perfectly fine goal to go about it, right? So let's say you're doing set two and you're doing 100 times 13, and then you're able to do 100 times 13 again, and then 100 times 12, let's say. And then on week three, you decide I'm going to try again for 100 times 13 for all of my reps. And you do 100 times 13, and then 100 times 13, and then a 100 times 13. And then from here on week three, you're like, okay, every single set is at the max of this rep range. I'm going to go up to 105 pounds next week. And I'm going to do that for, let's say, I'm going to try to get as many as possible in the 10 to 13 rep range, but maybe I'm only able to hit it for 10. And if you only hit it for 10 for the first set, there's a good chance you probably won't be able to hit it for 10 for the second, which means it will be under the rep range. So you could do one of two things. You could try 105 and just see, let's see, if I can actually hit 10 reps in this rep range. And maybe you only get 8. And that's okay. Because like I said, we really have this wider range of 6 to 20 to play with, even though this might say 10 to 13. So then you hit 105 for 8 on your second set. And then the third set, you're like, okay, I'm going to back down and try to see, if I can hit as many as 10 to 13. And with 100 pounds, maybe you hit 13 reps here. So then on week 5, you maybe start with 105 again, and maybe this time you get 11 reps. And then you do 105 again, and maybe this time you get 10 on the second set. And then you try again, and then the next set you do 105 for 8. And now on week 6, I'm going to try to, get in the 10 to 13 rep range for all those. Like this is a perfectly fine way to progress it. Now, kind of another scenario you could have done with this is, let's say on week one, this is what you did, and you're like, okay, on average, 2 of my sets are like on the high end of this rep range, right? It's 10 to 13. 2 of my sets are either 13 to 12 reps. So on week 2, I'm just going to jump up to 105. And maybe I hit it for 10 the first set, and then you hit 100 for maybe 11 on the second set, and then 100 for 10 on the next set. And then on week 3, you start with 105 again, and you do 11 reps, and then maybe you try 105 again, and maybe you only get 8 that time, and then you do 100, and then you get 11 or something. And then on week 3, or week 4, you do 105 again, and you hit 12 this time actually, and then you do 105 again and hit 10, and then you do 105 again, and you hit 8. Now, I know these numbers don't exactly match up, but you could very well end up at the same point over this 5-week period of like what your week 5 numbers look like if the one person decided to just keep the weight the same and try to hit the very top of the rep range for all 3 sets before progressing. And then person 2 actually just increase their weight when they hit maybe just half of their sets in the high end of the rep range versus just capping it out. Both ways really are perfectly fine. The most important part is just you're following these rules. You're getting around 2 reps shy from failure at least, if not, a little bit closer on exercises that are safer to do that. You're really getting close to failure too. You're not just like feeling it be hard and then stopping. You're using good form with all these tips there. As long as you do that, and over time, you're seeing yourself increase in either weight or reps slowly over time. That's the most important like piece. So hopefully it's helped to like hopefully it didn't overcomplicate things and it made it a little bit more simple. Like as long as you're conscious about I'm gonna do an extra rep. Like I'm gonna look at what I did last week and see, okay, I did 12 reps with this weight. I'm going to go for 13 with this weight. And I'm going to really push myself to get the 13. Or if you see, okay, I did 12 reps with this weight last week. This week, I'm going to go up 5 pounds and try to get maybe 12 reps too. That's progression. As long as you're really intentional about that over time, the minor details of like if you go about it as person A did here versus person B, really aren't really going to make a difference. I do personally lean towards this method here a little bit more than trying to max out all three sets at a certain weight. And the reason is because one, it does make it a little bit more exciting, like being able to increase the weight a little bit more often with this method. Also, the reason why I do it is because if you were to do, like, let's say week 3 for this person, if you're able to do 3 sets all with the same weight and the same amount of reps, it means that this first set probably wasn't actually 2 reps away from failure. You probably will see some kind of drop off in weight and reps between sets. And that is, a good sign that you also are pushing yourself close enough to failure. Because if this set 100 times 13 was truly only 2 reps away from failure for this person, they probably, their muscle would be fatigued enough where they wouldn't actually be able to get 13 reps here. So if you do follow this method, it's not that it's not effective, like it definitely is and can be. But I do think if you fall into a situation where you're able to do the same weight, the same amount of reps for 3 sets in a row, then that's probably a sign, okay, I need to go up next week because then this weight for this first set probably was farther away from failure than I think. Unless, this set feels like it's 2 away from failure. This one clearly feels like it's 1 away from failure, and this one was actually a failure. If that's the scenario, then, it probably was an accurate picture. But I do lean towards, like I said, increasing weight once like half of your sets are on the high end of the rep range. And then worst case scenario is you pick a little bit of a weight that's like a little bit too heavy and you still use good form and then you just stop, when you have to. And then you assess that information of, okay, I did 8 reps this time instead of 10. I'm going to decrease the weight for my, third set. And you just kind of adjust, as the sets go on. So hopefully that helped to answer your question, Janet, as far as, how to increase the weight and the reps. And there are some exercises where you are going to be hammering them week after week, and they're going to feel like they are not improving at all. Like the smaller muscle groups tend to be more stubborn to progress in strength and to progress through weights and reps. So, like doing lateral raises, shoulder lateral raises, like your middle deltoid is like the sole muscle that's pretty much worked with those. It's a pretty small muscle in general. So that's going to be harder to progress in. Like you might be doing the same weight for lateral raises for like really like months before you're able to actually increase. But you just got to keep pushing each week and eventually those numbers will slowly increase and your strength will slowly increase. Same thing for like bicep curls, even tricep pushdowns. Like you're probably not going to see huge changes in those after you get past the beginner stage. So just kind of keep that in mind too, that like some of these smaller muscle groups, it will just take longer to progress in. Um, so Misty, reading your question in the chat box here. So can you touch more on how to determine how long your fat burning phase should be, or how it's time to get back to your priming calorie amount? I'm hoping to switch to a fat loss phase after 4 consistent weeks in a priming phase, but want to understand how long to be in the fat loss phase to see your best results. So really great question. So first, just want to say, make sure, like if you're going to be in the priming phase for 4 weeks, make sure you've maxed out your maintenance level, like you're eating your maintenance calorie level for probably at least 2 weeks before going into that. So you might already be at your maintenance level and you're just going to stay at maintenance for 4 weeks, and that's fine. But just make sure you don't just like build up to that maintenance level and then immediately after you build up to it, you go into a fat loss phase. So make sure you don't jump into a fat loss phase too soon. That's kind of the first thing I wanted to say. But regarding how long to be in a fat loss phase for is most clients I recommend being in a fat loss phase for 6 to 12 weeks. That's usually the range where I find after somewhere between 6 to 12 weeks, a client tends to experience these symptoms of what I call diet fatigue. So these symptoms are they're more food focused mentally, like they're just keep thinking about their next meal. They keep thinking, oh, I wish I could have this burger. I wish I could have this Chipotle. I wish I could have this pizza. I wish I could have more than that. They tend to not feel as satisfied when they do have those things in like moderate amounts. Like you have a couple slices of pizza and you're just like ravenously hungry for more pizza. Also, some other symptoms of diet fatigue are just actually physically like feeling hungrier. So, not even just mentally craving more of these higher calorie foods, but physically, like your stomach's growling more and you physically can feel hungrier all the time. And it's getting to the point where like it feels like I don't know if I would say unbearable is the term, but it feels like you're just always kind of feeling really hungry all the time. Other symptoms of this diet fatigue are you're just feeling sluggish and mental clarity isn't really there. Like you show up to work or whatever you do throughout the day and you're just like mentally not into it as much. Your workouts also you end up mentally not being in them as much either. Like you're kind of dreading getting ready for your workout because you just feel tired all the time. You feel like your recovery isn't as great. You also if you're keeping track of your weights and reps, kind of like we went over in the other scenario, like even the big muscle groups or the big exercises like bench press and rows and squats, like you're not able to progress at all for multiple weeks in them, and you're even maybe even losing strength as the weeks go on. Other symptoms of this diet fatigue building up um, are your progress just slowing down too. Like if in the beginning, you were consistently noticing yourself looking a little bit leaner each week or every couple of weeks, maybe even noticing like the scale going down consistently, trending down around a pound on average each week, and then maybe even you're noticing like your progress pictures improving, but then 3, 4 weeks have gone by and not really noticing much of change. The scale isn't budging. Your clothes aren't fitting better. You're noticing all these other symptoms of diet fatigue. And maybe you even get to a point where your sleep is kind of hurting. Then that's a clear sign that you probably need like a little bit of a reset and to go into a maintenance phase or a diet break for 1 to 2 weeks. Um, and then going into another fat loss phase from there. So those are all the signs that tell you like whether you should do it at the 6 week mark or the 12 week mark. In general, um, if somebody is a larger individual or they have more body fat to lose, they could probably get away with being in a fat loss phase for closer to 12 weeks before they go into a maintenance break or diet break. If somebody isn't like really that overweight and they're kind of just trying to lose weight for like vanity reasons, or they just want to quote unquote look better in their eyes and lose a little bit of body fat there, here and there, you probably want to do a diet break maybe every closer to the 6 to 8 week mark. So the more body fat you have on your frame, the longer it will take to experience these diet fatigue symptoms. The smaller amount of body fat you have in your frame, the quicker you probably will experience these diet fatigue symptoms. And also, too, practically keep in mind what your schedule looks like, what holidays are going on. If you have a vacation lined up, you might feel ready to like feel good to be in a fat loss phase for 12 weeks. But if you have a vacation coming up on week 9 of your fat loss phase, it's probably practically best to go into a diet break or maintenance phase after, 8 or 9 weeks. So that way you're able to practice maintenance on your vacation instead of worrying about trying to be in a fat loss phase while you're on your trip. If you are in a fat loss phase and like the week of Thanksgiving is coming up and you have like 4 different Thanksgiving dinners to go to or Christmas or whatever, it's probably a good idea to be in maintenance for those weeks. So not only think about what your body and mind feels like it needs physically and mentally, but also think about practically how your schedule lines up, where to implement these diet breaks, because doing a diet break on vacation is perfect. Doing a maintenance phase on vacation is perfect. And also when it comes to fat loss phases, being in a fat loss phase, anything shorter than 3 weeks is kind of pointless. So if you have like a vacation coming up in 4 weeks and you're ready to start your fat loss phase and you're only going to be able to be in a fat loss phase for 3 weeks, you might as well just wait until after the vacation to start the fat loss phase in general, because it's just kind of pointless to push for fat loss for just, 2 to 3 weeks at a time. So hopefully that answered your question as far as when to implement and how long, I guess, to implement these fat loss phases. Um, but it also depends on, what your goal is too. If you have like 20 pounds to lose, you'll probably do more fat loss phases than somebody that just has like maybe 7 pounds that want to lose. But as far as the length of each fat loss phase before going into a diet break, you want to take into account all those diet fatigue symptoms, along with, like I said, if you don't have a lot to lose, probably on the lower end. If you have more to lose, want to do that probably on the higher end. Um, or you probably could get away with being in a fat loss phase longer. And then keeping in mind practically what your schedule looks like. And realize like there's no set rules too. Like if you could go 12 weeks, but you just want to do 6 weeks at a time and then go into another fat loss phase, you very well could do that too. But I do fall into the camp of like, I think it's best to probably do a diet break or a maintenance phase just like a little bit before you actually need it. So if you end up like being ravenously hungry at the 12-week mark of your diet phase, or of your fat loss phase, and this is very consistent with you, like every 12 weeks of being in a fat loss phase, you're like, I need a maintenance phase really bad. I'd probably implement a maintenance phase at like the 9 or 10 week mark. So a little bit sooner than that, because that way you're able to go into this maintenance phase for a couple of weeks with more of a clear head without all this hunger built up, which means you're going to be less likely to gain, like to overeat, binge, and gain a bunch of body fat back during this maintenance phase. So we almost kind of want to try to avoid all these symptoms from adding up completely, like before implementing it. So if you do notice a specific trend in you of like feeling like you really need the diet break after 12 weeks every single time, probably would try to implement that every 9 to 10 weeks, so you just never reach that true burnout stage in general. So hopefully that was helpful. I appreciate you guys for hopping on.